Welcome back for part 2 of our Bullhead video series. If you haven't seen part 1, it's just an overview of the reference, and today I'm going to get a little more involved. If you saw the last video, a major concern right off the bat with this one is if we move the crown into the hand setting position, we can see that there is no freedom of movement forward or backwards. And that's obviously pretty serious for a watch if you can't set the time. There's got to be some pretty major issues going on. It could be a failure of a plastic part, but there's also some indications and evidence of a little rust on the dial there around the opening of the center hole there. So, you know, we'll find out when we get there. But today we're going to disassemble this one, get a better look at the movement, and we'll start just by removing the case back, which I have already loosened. So we'll just take it off here and see what's going on behind the case back. Okay, well, right off the bat, I'm pretty relieved to see there's not a lot of corrosion or discoloration, not a lot to complain about with the condition of the movement. Things could be certainly a lot worse. I do see some rust on the movement ring spring, but that's not uncommon. I see that pretty fairly, that whatever metal they use to make these springs, it's not incredibly high quality, and they're pretty prone to corrosion, and rust often has to be replaced. But we'll start by removing the auto wind mechanism. Movement holder for 6138 and 39 doesn't accommodate the auto wind, so we'll definitely have to start by removing the rotor and auto wind bridge. Okay, if you find yourself removing or replacing an auto wind bridge, auto wind mechanism for one of these 6138s or 39s, keep in mind that it's very important not to over tighten those screws. The studs that are mounted inside of the chronograph bridge, they're just pressure fit in there, and it is very easy to turn them right loose from the bridge if you're not careful. You can also break these screw heads. The threaded portion is actually quite thin and can break fairly easily, so just be careful with that. Or just send it to me. All right. Yep, nope, not a lot of rust on the bearings. And our jewel looks good. Yeah, dirty. Have a look at our pawl lever here. Seiko's magic lever. Yeah, jewel looks good there. Transmission wheel. Yeah, still definitely lots of life left there. With the auto wind mechanism removed, you can see really the movement's in pretty good shape from this side. I'm going to go ahead and remove it from the case and get it set up in the movement holder, and we'll take a closer look at things on the calendar side. So after removing the auto wind mechanism, and I went ahead and pulled the balance as well, which actually looks to be in really good shape. Good shape in the coil of the hairspring, and it doesn't seem to have any wobble in both. At least the top cap jewel looks good, so I don't have many concerns that the issue is there. But again, we can see some rust here on the stem And again, you know, there's points of intrusion on these watches. If water can get in, it's going to, and certainly you'll see evidence of that if that is the case. Yeah, there's definitely some residue around the center portion of the dial there, and quite a bit of dirt and debris on the dial as well. So I think that we'll be able to make quite a bit of an improvement in the appearance of the dial just by cleaning it and being careful to remove all of this debris and settled oil around the center hole. So next we're going to remove the hands and the dial and get a look at the calendar components and remove them as well, and have a better look at the calendar side of the movement. I was going to use my regular lifters to take the hands off of this dial, but with the amount of residue and possibly pooled oil there around that center hole, I really want to try to, as much as possible, not come into contact with any of that dial at all. So I'm going to use the Presto style. I think I can get away with that because of the way that the hands are lined up. I've got a good area to grip on either side. I think that should work out just fine. I recommend, no matter what style hand remover that you use, always put something between your lifting surface and the dial. I use a thin piece of plastic. I just cut several to size and use them as a way to shield the dial from any damage when you're removing hands. And it will go a long way in keeping anything from happening to your dial surface. All right, we'll find a clean spot here and see if we can get these hands off of here. Now, on the 61 38s and 39s, the chronograph sweep hand is pressed onto the chronograph wheel post very firmly. It takes quite a bit of effort to remove them, especially if they've not been removed before. They usually don't go back on quite as tight the second time. But it's a shaped post. It's got two flat sides and one flat side, depending, and the collet on the sweep hand starts as round and then assumes the shape of the post of the chronograph wheel once it's mated to that wheel. And you can't just transfer one sweep hand from one watch to another and assume that it's going to zero. Most likely it's not going to do that at all. The mating position of that collet will be on some other point on the dial. So it's important to carefully remove that sweep hand and do all you can to make sure that you don't affect that collet in any way that might loosen it on the post of the chronograph. Yeah, let's get a look at this hour hand. It's quite dirty. I think some of this will clean, but there's definitely some rust and some missing paint as well. But we will see. We'll give the client some options there. But definitely that's pretty dirty and definitely has some discoloration from moisture intrusion. I'm just going to use standard lifters to remove the chronograph register, hour and minute register hands. Obviously there's not really enough room to grab with the Presto style there, but of course you do want to use some sort of a shield between the dial and the lifter as well to protect the dial. It's good to regularly sharpen your lifter edges so that you don't run the risk of gouging the dial. A sharper edge will work much better and getting under the lip of the hand. with the hands removed, you can get a really good look at the dial. I'll try to get really close here. You can see that there is quite a bit of settled residue of some sort around the center hole of the dial. Could be wet, dry, I don't know yet. We'll certainly make our best effort to clean that without causing any harm to the dial. I can actually see a bit of rust coloring, some sort of rust material has settled here on the dial. Quite a bit of dirt and residue on the sub registers as well. And these little flecks that you see on the dial, that is some sort of debris. Probably will blow off cleanly, mostly with the bellows, but if not, we can clean that as well. The luminous material, the color isn't terrible. Some darkening, obviously clear indication of ingress at some point. These two on over here, 9 and 8, are a little bit darker. Certainly be careful not to knock any of that luminous off of there. Most people, even if there's patina or color, would prefer it just to be honest, as it was, just cleaned as much as possible. So we'll attempt to do that and see where we end up. Worth mentioning is most times on the back of the dial there'll be a production date stamp, and sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, but it's a good way to make sure that the dial that you have is correctly matched to the case you have. Usually it will be the same year unless it's right around year end or year beginning. This is 6 and 9. So in 1976 and September of that year, and we'll check to see what date is on the case as well and compare the two. As we mentioned before, the case back is from 76 as well, and November of that year. So the case was actually manufactured after the dial. Not uncommon for a couple of months, 2, 3, sometimes 4, or even longer in between when a case and a dial were put together as a pair, but within the same year and within 4 or 5 months is a pretty fair bet that that's the dial that goes with that case. I've set the dial aside and we can get a look at the calendar wheels here. There's a small clip here that holds the day wheel in place, and obviously it's pretty easy to spot a Bullhead day wheel. They are pretty unique in that the days are vertically set on the disc instead of horizontally. Read top to bottom rather than right to left. So they can be a little harder to replace if you have a damaged one, because obviously there's a lot more of your standard style day disc, but yeah, the Bullhead is a pretty unique setup there, and obviously the date wheel is no different, vertically set again instead of horizontally. Not too much concern here right off the bat. I'll know more once I get the day and date wheel off of there, but we'll remove those and get a look at the upper plate and see how things look and whether we can get a good idea of why these hands won't turn. With the calendar discs out of the way, really all that's left is the finger spring for the date wheel here, and then of course you have the date driving wheel and the date finger underneath, and then the day finger up top. And those are plastic parts. Sometimes the day finger is as metal, but as they're plastic, they are more prone to failure, especially over several decades. But both of these look okay and are moving freely within their slots. So as was my first inclination that possibly this date finger was damaged, that's not the case. So we'll dig a little deeper and find out what's going on. Oh, also you have on this side your intermediate day setting wheel. This comes into contact with the star wheel on the underside of the date disc, and is part of the quick set function. I think actually the quick set on this one does still operate. Yeah, so you can see there's a rocker, and you can use this same star wheel to change the, here we'll get a little closer. You can use this same star wheel to forward rotation turns the date disc, and then it rocks back to engage with that intermediate wheel to turn the day wheel, and we'll show that in action when we get on the other side of this thing. But let's get both of those removed and get this upper plate off and take a look underneath. With the day and date fingers removed and driving wheel and the intermediate date wheel, I went ahead and pulled the screws from this upper plate. Some of the sharper eyed among you might have seen that the screw on this side was missing, and it's not impossible that that screw is somewhere in the mix here causing an issue, but yes, this one was definitely not present. You can back up and check if you don't believe me, but we'll remove this upper plate and see if we can see what's causing our problems underneath, and also get a better idea of what the upper side of this movement looks like. It's pretty interesting. Another common failure point on 6138 is this, here, let me grab something to point with. This jewel, which is the upper barrel arbor jewel, can and often is broken and needs to be replaced, and certainly will have an impact on how well your watch is running. But I think this one is okay. Yeah, very nice. No cracks or abrasion, no chipping. It's in good shape. So we'll set that here. And underneath, we can see the only other plastic part in this movement is this intermediate wheel that moves from the minute wheel to engage with the day wheel on top. So the date driving wheel on top. And rarely do I see problems with those, but there's also a metal version of that wheel that's part of several other movements. And so if I find an issue with one of the plastic ones, it's not uncommon to change it over to a metal one, and often at the request of customers. But this one actually looks just fine. And again, I don't always, in fact, rarely see an issue with that wheel. It's not under a lot of torque, and so I don't normally see any issues with that. So everything for the hour portion of the chronograph, the 12-hour portion, is up on this side, the calendar side of the movement. And you have your start and stop lever up top. So really just an ingenious design for how the 12-hour portion of the chronograph works here. It's what's called a modular design. Basically, they just built more movement onto what was already there. No need to redesign their existing 6139 minute chronograph to add a 12-hour portion. They just built it all on top of the calendar side and connected it via a post On the actuator lever here, there's a spring that holds it in place, and when the clutch is opened or closed on the reverse side, that opens and closes this lever and allows the 12-hour wheel here to either rotate or to be held in place. And it is directly driven by a post and wheel on top of the mainspring, which is just what a great design. Very efficient use of the space. You have a reset hammer here that connects to the heart of this chronograph wheel, and of course a couple of springs that actuate that reset hammer on the top there, but it's a lot less complicated than it looks looking down on it. It's pretty simplistic design, and all of this really only added about 3 millimeters in height, maybe less, to add an entirely new component to their existing chronograph. That's really impressive, and just such a great use of the space that was already there, and just great design all the way around. So far, we don't quite know yet where our issue is, but we'll go ahead and remove the chronograph components and the keyless works as well, and see if we can't get a better idea a little further down what's causing our problems. After removing the chronograph components and before moving on to the keyless works, I attempted to remove the hour wheel and Canon pinion, which carries the minute hand, and it wouldn't budge. So I used my Canon pinion puller to go ahead and pull both, and of course they came together, and I noticed immediately that the Canon pinion is stuck, rusted tight inside of that hour wheel. So that is definitely where our problem is and why the hands wouldn't budge. Certainly not something that could be fixed without a service. But we're gonna soak that in some penetrating oil and get it nice and clean. And I'm sure they'll separate pretty easily. I'm sure both are salvageable. If not, we'll replace that Canon pinion. But I think that hour wheel looks fine. Definitely just some of the same rust that we saw on the dial a few minutes earlier. That is the same that's causing the problem with why it won't run. In fact, I'd be willing to bet, minus this issue, this watch would probably run okay. Good news for the client. It means very little in the way of having to replace a lot of parts, but certainly a full stop on the movement because of that. With the chronograph bridge removed, you can get a better idea of how this movement operates. You have the chronograph wheel here in the center, the top portion, and this little finger on the outer edge there, each rotation will push this intermediate wheel, which in turn rotates the minute register wheel 1 minute's distance and kicks that hand over each time that comes around. The reset hammer for both is here. So with a press of the reset button, that actuates that hammer, which engages hearts on both of these wheels to bring them back to zero. Of course, the column wheel is the start and stop point of the chronograph, as the clutch lever there rides along the columns inside or outside, means go or stop. And of course, There are a couple of springs that give some movement to the actuators on both the start, stop, and the reset. We'll get a little further down and take a closer look at that chronograph wheel. With the barrel bridge removed, we can see the chronograph wheel, and this is often what will fail in a 6139 or 38 movement, and is the point of, I guess there's really no debate, but some debate out there about whether it's best to leave your chronograph running or leave it stopped. And in the case of this movement from Seiko, you definitely want to leave it running all the time because stopping it compresses the spring. It would be very difficult to show you, I guess, without some proper magnification. Along the upper edge here, you can see a portion of there's almost like a spiral shaped bar inside, and that's really just a simple spring. But you can imagine that if you had a spring, let's grab one. In order to stop the chronograph on this movement, if you had a standard spring like so, you have to compress it like this all the time. And leaving this spring, if I were to leave it compressed in my fingers for an extended period of time, eventually it's not going to spring back as far as it once did. However, if we leave it in this unsprung manner, when we need to compress it, when we need that tension, it'll be there. So we can rest assured that we'll have the stopping power that we need without causing any damage to the spring of that chronograph wheel. So you decide, best to keep a spring compressed or not. I think it's pretty obvious. So if you have a 6139 or 38, leave it running. You can easily start and stop it to time specific events, but there's no fixed second hand anyway, no dedicated second hand, so you might as well use your chronograph hand as a second hand and leave it running. Besides, it looks cool anyway. So after pulling this chronograph wheel, it actually is in great shape because the watch hasn't been running. There's not much wear on the spring. Everything is as it should be and closes up tightly, and no bends, and the tip looks great. The wheel is firmly attached and the finger is the correct shape. So I have no concerns with reinstalling this, and I think it's going to do its job just fine. From there, all we have left is the mainspring and going train, and of course the pallet bridge and fork. And once those are removed, we'll be ready to begin cleaning. Laid out sequentially, you can see there's no shortage of parts in this movement. It's quite involved, but I think once everything here is cleaned and lubricated, we remove some of this corrosion. This is the the dial spacing ring, but otherwise really no concerns. Very little wear on the barrel arbor. No beveling to be concerned about. I think the mainspring will fit snugly in place, very little shake, and I think this watch is going to run superbly once we remove the rust and actually apply some lubrication here. We'll move on from here to part 3 where we'll take a look at the case components, see what we can do, and that'll include stem, and we'll take a look at the pushers and replace the missing one, see about getting that broken pusher out of the tube. So come back, there's going to be lots more to talk about with this one, and I'll have the movement components clean by then, and we'll start reassembling and see where we end up with this bullhead on the dial. If you're curious, want to see how we go from what we started with to where we like to end up, I hope you'll come back and check out part 3. If you have any questions or comments, please do so below, or you can contact me at service@hubcityvintage.com, and I'll be glad to answer those for you. And okay, thanks for watching.